So our next session is data impurities and how to outwit them. And our presenters are Sarah Lindsay and Lisa Wong, both of the University of California at Santa Cruz. Lisa graduated with a BA in computer science from UC Santa Cruz, worked as a QA engineer for Nokia and McAfee before she decided she wanted to work in the public sector. She joined the UCSC Registrar Office in 2005, and then the Metadata Services Department in the library in 2006 as a copy cataloger. She's now the lead for the electronic resources and serials, and was the link resolver analytics functional expert on their Alma migrations team. Sarah is the head of Metadata Services Department and also the acquisitions librarian at UC Santa Cruz. Sarah has an MLS from Simmons College and has worked with many departments throughout the library, including circulation, collection, maintenance, and reserves. She served on the UCSC LMS implementation team as the current head of the Alma Primo management team. So let's turn this over. Are you guys there?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so you can share.
Here we go, and present. Okay, does that look good?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted.
So the UCSC library was founded in 1965, and since then, we have gone through many catalog iterations, accepting that every library catalog has errors and that the average rate of human error for data entry is 1%, coupled with the changes that occur in cataloging practice, acquisitions practice, fulfillment practice, etc. over time, added to the fact that retrospective work on records is often not possible due to staffing and system constraints, any system will end up with a lot of data irregularity. UCSC last migrated catalog systems in 1994. During that migration, we experienced a significant data loss, and the resulting cleanup was done with more speed than accuracy. As we began to seriously contemplate a migration, we knew that all the known and unknown data oddities from our database were going to surface. And just a word about the image that you're seeing. This is the courtyard of the UCSC McHenry Library as it looked on a particularly misty day in 2003. UCSC went live with Alma 7 months ago, and we are a small University of California campus. We have 7 staff members in our Metadata Services Department. As a bonus to our known data oddities, our migration timeline was reduced by 40 days due to concerns over losing access to our old ILS earlier than planned. This left us with even less time to review our data issues, and so in this presentation we will be describing cleanup work that was done in our old Millennium system as well as work done in our new Alma system. Working within the old system had its drawbacks, as did working within the new system. In the old system, we were comfortable but frustrated, and in the new system, we were excited but unsure. Our data cleanup work divides into 2 categories: work done within the MARC record and work done on the item, order, and serials check-in records. I will first be covering the latter, and then Lisa will jump in with some of our more intense MARC field work. Before we began any cleanup, we removed as many non-essential records as possible. Vendors that were not attached to existing orders, order and bib records for withdrawn items, check-in records for electronic serials. We had been keeping closed serial order record data going back to the 80s. All of these had served a purpose at one time, but were now obsolete. We strongly recommend this pre-migration work, as removing the obsolete records allowed us to more clearly see the errors in the records we did not want to migrate. Working from the migration forms provided by Ex Libris, we began the work of matching our fixed fields to those in Alma. When there was not an obvious matching field in the new system, We engaged in conversations with staff to interrogate our processes and look for opportunities to simplify our workflows. Over time, some fixed fields had ended up with codes that did not fit into one category. For example, one fixed field had codes indicating if the record should be deleted, suppressed, or withdrawn, as well as if that item was a rebind, as well as if that item was a monograph. I think the most important advice we could give when considering what data irregularities might cause problems in the new system is this: trust your gut. The title of this presentation is Data Impurities and How to Outwit Them, and knowledge is power. I'm sure we can all think of an odd local practice instituted from time immemorial that we continue with because it seems like it isn't breaking anything right now. Migration is a great time to address those issues, especially because they may have unintended consequences down the road. Our old system let us be very, let's say, free with our data. One example is that we had some barcodes that had been entered with spaces between the groups of numbers. Hand-entered barcode numbers had spaces because at some point in the past, someone thought it would be better if we could tell which barcodes had been keyed by hand. Additionally, there was one barcode scanner at our science and engineering library that was programmed to insert spaces. No one noticed that this scanner was doing anything out of the ordinary because the old system still read the barcodes it created. And not to spoil the end of my story, but ALMA could not handle the barcodes with spaces, and this misprogrammed barcode reader hilariously turned out to be the only one that still worked until we fixed all the barcodes. To boot, some staff had been adding notes to the end of the barcodes, that they were lost, etc., rendering them unreadable. It is not my intent to air our dirty laundry. It's only to say that all these oddities were a consequence of our relaxed older system. Despite cleaning up as many coding issues as we could think of, I don't think there's any way we could have predicted the barcode spaces would be a problem. We did not catch that they were an issue during our data review period, and if we did see them without trying to scan them, we would not have seen them as an error. Though we explored local options, ultimately it was necessary for Ex Libris to fix this issue via API. Another point of failure for us was fields in our system that we weren't using. In our reserves module, there were start and end dates for each course. Our reserves department never used these dates as a rule because they had a workflow that didn't require them. The Ex Libris migration program expected those date fields to be part of the data string for each reserve class. And so we found ourselves having to add dummy dates to the fields before sending them off. Now I will hand this over to Lisa to describe some of the amazing work she did.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to be covering two issues we found, one post-migration and one pre-migration. The first issue was call number spacing, which we discovered post-migration. In Millennium, our call numbers were formatted in a variety of ways. We didn't have periods between the LC number and the first cutter. We also didn't have a consistent use of subfield B, and additionally, we had inconsistent spacing between the first, second, and third cutters. This was not an issue in Millennium, but it caused us many problems in ALMA, and it had to be fixed ASAP. Since we had to move quickly, what helped to speed up the process is that Sarah did the initial triage. She determined that the call numbers that were causing the most problems were ones that had second cutters lacking subfield B or cutters without any spaces. She determined that these cutters needed to be moved into the subfield I on the holdings record. Since I was the most proficient with regular expressions in programming, my task was to see if there was a way to fix the holdings record with a normalization rule. I noticed that there was an option for running normalization rules in the change holding information job. After some research on Ex Libris' site, I found a normalization rule for moving cutter ends into subfield I in the holdings record. Since I was still unfamiliar with ALMA, I created a test set with a couple of test cutter ends and copied the rule into the shared folder as directed. However, when I went to the normalization rule dropdown, I didn't see the rule listed. And there were other rules there, so I knew it could be done. I wound up digging more in Ex Libris' site and into the training videos, and that's when I discovered that process had to be created out of a normalization rule in order for it to run against the set. Once I created a process, I was able to test the normalization rule against our data. And here's the rule I actually copied from the ALMA site. It's a 3-part rule that none of the 3 parts will execute if there's existing subfield I in the holdings record. The first rule replaces the cutter M with the actual word separator underbar M if subfield I doesn't exist. The second rule then splits the cutter M into a second subfield H, and that separator underbar that you see there is discarded. Then the third rule changes the second subfield H into subfield I. I ran some initial tests against a few of our cutter M's that needed correcting, but I wasn't getting the results I anticipated. It turned out that this rule assumed that A, you only had 1 cutter M in the call number, and B, that the cutter M was always the second cutter. This didn't suit the changes I had to make, so I had to alter the rule against the behavior I saw in our data. In the end, I wound up making 2 rules, one to cover second cutters lacking subfield B, the other to cover third cutters. My original plan was to use regular expression search in Notepad++ to separate out the call numbers by the first letter of their second cutter. Unfortunately, I was not able to double check my results, so I switched to OpenRefine. The fasting function OpenRefine allowed me to group any anomalies that didn't fit in the 2 categories I listed. I could then modify the rule for that group. If certain oddly formatted call numbers couldn't be fasted, then I fixed them by hand. And now, here's an example of an issue we discovered pre-migration involving our Boundwith extracts. Because of legacy data, our Boundwiths were exported in a fashion that didn't agree with Ex Libris' scripts. Our 4408 Boundwith records were extremely challenging because we were informed of the formatting problem about a week before we had to turn in our extracts. Another member of our implementation team was working on the item extracts. I was responsible for the PDE file and the bid extracts. So my challenge was that I needed a way to research the solution without interfering with her work. We also had no other staff who could work full-time on the solution. And here's an example of an item extract. At the top of the red box is an item extract for a regular bid record. You basically have the bid record number, followed immediately by the item record number, the item call number, then the 099 from the bid, the 090, the 050, and so on. Unfortunately, since our Boundwith volumes in Millennium were separate bid records sharing 1 item record, this meant that when it's extracted, you would see the pattern in line 2 in the red box. At a glance, you can see that there's more empty fields in front of the call number than there are on the line above. This shot is a close-up of those 2 lines. As you can see, the regular item extract on top has 2 empty fields after the item record number before the 090 call number starts. In contrast, the Boundwith extract underneath has 5 empty fields before the 090. And on the second line, where the item number starts, you can see that the regular item extract has 7 empty fields after the 090 call number, but the Boundwith has 13 empty fields after the 090. It turned out that for every call number generated by each bid record in the Boundwith, the amount of padding inserted before the 090 equaled the number of bid records minus 1. The amount added after the 090 equaled the number of call numbers in the bid record plus 1. In addition to adjusting the padding for the Boundwiths, the call numbers needed to be read as 1 unit. So the commas separating them had to be changed into semicolons. Ex Libris told us that the bid numbers could be left as they were. The easiest thing to do would be to fix in Excel, but we couldn't use it to fix formatting issues because that introduced data that Ex Libris' migration scripts couldn't parse. My challenge at this point was to develop a process that my fellow implementation team member could execute easily to pull up the boundwidths. Once she did so, I could work on them interrupting her work on the item extracts. Ex Libris had suggested earlier that we use Notepad++ to process our item extracts, which I had never used before. After some research, I discovered that it could perform a regular expression search. This could be used to find the boundwidths, but that didn't solve the problem of extraction. After more research, I found out that Notepad++ had a bookmarking function which could be used to extract lines from a file. The search function had a tab that could use the marked lines. All you had to do was insert the search criteria and bookmark the lines. Once the lines were bookmarked, there was a menu in Notepad++ that could be used on anything that was bookmarked. I used this functionality to copy the bookmark lines to the clipboard, and then I opened another document. The lines were then pasted in, and then I pasted in the header from the previous file. Then the bookmarking menu could be used to remove the bookmark lines. So I wrote up this workflow for the person doing the item extracts and handed it off to her. Then I started writing some Perl scripts to deal with the padding issues. I didn't use Notepad++ for a couple of reasons. The regular expressions couldn't do look behind, and it couldn't calculate how much padding to subtract. The first Perl script used look behind to find call numbers in the Boundwith extract and reformat them as semicolons. Then I had a second script for that block of semicolons and counted up the number of call numbers. Then I stripped all the padding from in front and from behind the 090, and the amount of padding inserted was calculated based on the number of call numbers. This worked for our first file of Boundwith extracts. Everything in the file lacked an item record number, had an 090, padding in front and behind of that 090. Unfortunately, we had unanticipated data. Later extracts had item call numbers, 086s extracted along with the 090, and some boundwidths with 050, 099 instead of 090. This meant that my script only fixed about 50% of the boundwidths. At this point, we had 3 days left before we had to turn in all our extracts. I still have to finish assembling my bib extracts on the PDE file, so I couldn't finish tuning my script to cover all possibilities. But I also couldn't hand it off to other staff to hand fix because the item extract in Notepad++, as you've seen, is very hard to read to the naked eye. And since these were hand fixes, they would need to be checked before we turned them into Ex Libris. Our solution was to think outside of the box. To make an Excel-friendly reference copy, what I had to do was duplicate the Notepad++ copy and reformat it so it would display in Excel. To do that, I used a regular expression search and replace, and I changed the comma between the bib numbers into a semicolon. Once that reformat was done, all bib numbers would be placed in one cell, and the rest of the columns would line up as Ex Libris' scripts were interpreting them. I could now hand both copies off to other staff. They could open the reference copy in Excel and make the changes accordingly on the Notepad++ version. Then the finished version would be handed back to me. From that version, I could create my own reference copy, reformat my copy in Notepad++, so I could double check the work in OpenRefine. And here's what one of my reference copies looked like in OpenRefine. I used the fasting function to quickly see what data needed correction. Here I've just faceted the copy number column. As you can see, most rows have a 1 or 2, which is correct. However, 3 rows have volume numbers, which is in the column before the copy number, and 1 row is blank. Those 3 rows are incorrect, and I can click on the facets to discover which lines needed correction, and I could easily see how much padding to adjust on my working copy. Once all the correction was done, I could do a final concatenation, and I submitted the boundwidths as its own item extract file. And now I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
So clearly, as you can see, we did a lot of cleanup in our post-migration environment. One choice we made that proved to be invaluable for our later work was to apply some local field tags to groups of records we knew we would need to be able to work with later, and also to get our old system's unique identifier number mapped into a local tag as well. Ex Libris set up the indexing so that these fields are easy to search in the new system. Being able to search using our old system numbers was critical in the early weeks of our migration. It gave staff a lifeline when they felt like they couldn't navigate any other way, and then they were able to naturally transition to using the new MMS ID numbers as they became more comfortable.
And we have a list here of invaluable resources, Ex Libris's knowledge base. It's quite dense, but it is a good resource. You need to go digging for information. I've also found that the ALMA Administrator Certification videos are another good resource, especially if you're working in import profiles. Sometimes helps to have a visual example when I need it, when I was trying to understand the logic behind import profiles. I also have a link to examples of ALMA's normalization rules. They have their own syntax, so it's valuable to see like what the actual code does. And finally, the ALMA community mailing list. And now I'm going to open up the floor for questions.
Thank you, Sarah and Lisa. That was good. I'm like, oh, good. I just learned some new tricks with Notepad++ that I didn't know about. Yes. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. I know it's probably getting around lunchtime for some people, at least here on the East Coast, so people may be
Hungry.
sort of wandering away from their desk to go have lunch. So it's a little quiet. And I was like, oh, good, this is speaking my language. Stephen wanted to know, what was your reaction to the fact that Primo doesn't adequately leverage all of the metadata that you and your colleagues so carefully create?
It's a good question. We are running Primo VE, and that has come with its own unique set of challenges. Also, we are not yet in a consortial environment, and we don't know if we will be. And so we are trying right now to sort out metadata problems that are caused by our shared cataloging records. I think one of the things we did is we created a lot of local indexes in Primo so that, for instance, we added all of our 5XX fields to display. And we continue to work on different Primo customizations recommended by catalogers, and especially our special collections department was used to a different level of ability, I think, in the public catalog than they're seeing right now. And so we're working with them. So we're trying to fix it. That's the answer.
So that's interesting. I didn't realize, so UC didn't implement as a consortia?
No. I think 5 of the 10 campuses are currently running ALMA. Some campuses are running the sort of Primo Classic, and some are running Primo VE.
Anybody else have any questions? Vicky wanted to know, what is the difference between Classic and VE?
It seems to be pretty different. The biggest sort of user difference is that it refreshes a lot faster. So Primo Classic, I think, refreshes once a day, similar to the way that Oracle to Analytics refreshes. With Primo VE, we've seen changes that we've made to records appear almost immediately. Sometimes they take as long as 15 minutes, but usually it's much shorter than that. It does seem like it is still a little bit in development. which I know is kind of a feature, not a bug of the Ex Libris products.
There's a lot of ferberization too.
Yes. Yeah, it's we're using the discovery layer in Primo, and it is I think Primo VE, it's their new product, and it's what they would like everyone to be on, I think.
Yeah, Stephen chimed in to say it seems that Primo VE is not as customizable as regular Primo. I wouldn't know, but
yeah,
I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know exactly either. I think that what it is that regular Primo has been around for longer, and so it has had more work done on it. That's more my impression. I think we've been able to customize Primo VE a lot in the short time that we've been running it, and we have other customizations in mind moving forward. So,
okay, great. Does anybody else? Irina wanted to know. So you basically replicated most of your old indices into VE?
I would say yes and no. We obviously went through such a dramatic change from Millennium. We never migrated to Sierra, and then we moved into this Alma and Primo environment. It almost was like a complete new start. So we saw how it looked out of the box, and then we started looking for things that we would have expected to see, not necessarily based on our old system, but based on our user needs.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Fortunately, the way this is set up, I can't see if anyone's typing, so I'll give a minute in case anyone is typing right now. So far, it doesn't look like anyone else has any other questions right now. So if anybody does have any questions, they find themselves having questions, please email Sarah or Lisa, or both of them, with your questions, and they'll be happy to answer them.